There's a call comes ringing for the restless race. Send the light, send the light, send the light, send the light. There are souls to rescue, there are souls to save. Send the light, send the light, send the light, send the light. We will spread the everlasting light with the willing heart in hand, giving God the glory evermore. We will follow His command. Send the light, the blessing gospel light. Let it shine, from shore to shore, Send the light, and let its rays beams like the Lord.
That's what we need to be saying, send the light. But when we start down the pathway to death, we're entering darkness. And if we remain in the darkness, chances get less and less that we'll ask God to send the light. We become more and more complacent and satisfied with what's around us. So we dare not start down that path. And if we do, we need to get off it quickly. So we're going to identify how that happens today. Say it with me, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Remember Hebrews 3 and verse 13, but exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. So our series here has been entitled The Pathway to Death. And though it may sound like something that is dark and, that we could maybe look at something a little cheerier, the good news is that we're identifying the pathway so that we can get off of it or avoid it altogether. That's a cheery thought. So you have to know where the danger is in order to avoid it. So today we're gonna try to talk a little bit about where this all stems from, the origin of this pathway to death, and in particular, the lust that we talk about. We've identified desire, temptation, lust, sin, and then last time we talked about lewdness, also called lasciviousness in the King James Version, or licentiousness in the Revised Standard Version, and some others. So, death takes place when sin comes to fruition. Maybe we ought to just go back over and remind ourselves, James chapter 1 and verse 13. This is where we're looking at that pathway. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed, a word that means entrapped. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. That is a dark, dark path, isn't it? And yet it's one that we all travel on at some point. Romans 3 and verse 23 says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's something that we do. May not be something we want to do on paper, but in our flesh, we desire things. The devil gives us temptations to satisfy those desires in ways other than God specified. That's transgressing God's law, which we lust for those things. We actively make plans, and then when we carry them out, we commit sin. And at that point, when sin is committed, when it's finished, death is the result. Romans 6 and verse 23 says, the wages of sin is death. So that's what we get paid. That's the right payment for engaging in sin. Where does all this start? Let's look at a couple passages that help us identify this. One is one that I used, I think, Sunday morning. He was either in a class or in the sermon. And it's one that I think helps us in a couple different ways. If you look over at 1 Peter 2 and verse 11, Peter says, "Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation." Two things there. I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims. Number one, Peter identifies the fact that we are just passing through this life, that our home is in heaven. As Christians, that's what we have declared. And so we need to view this life as temporary. We're just resident aliens. We're just passing through here. We're not putting down roots. And so with that in mind, that you're only going to be here a while, that this world is not your home. With that in mind, he says, abstain from fleshly lust, which war against the soul. Stay away from those. And notice they're fleshly lust. They're not spiritual lust. That would be a good lust. But they're fleshly lust. So they have their origin in the flesh, the things that the flesh desires. And of course, if the flesh desires a thing naturally, then it's a God-given desire. And then if it's a God-given desire, there's a God-given way to satisfy it. So we don't have to worry about that. But if I have a desire to kill, for example, that's not a God-given desire. That's something that the devil's put within me. Maybe it's to satisfy anger or some other type of lust that I have, that things that have gotten out of control. But those things have to do with the flesh. Fleshly lust war against the soul. They never have the soul's good in mind. They war against the soul. So Peter begs us to abstain, stay away from those things. Over in Galatians chapter 5 and beginning in verse 19, Paul delineates for us the works of the flesh. And you'll notice that these are the things that war against the soul. The works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness. That's that word we looked at in our last study that is translated, it's the word aselgia. It's translated lasciviousness many times in the King James Version. Verse 20, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like, of which I tell you beforehand, just as I also told you in time past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. So these things war against our souls. There may be a desire to satisfy some of these things, but it's not a God-given desire, and it's because it's something that will keep us from heaven. You practice these things, you will not go to heaven. It's not my words. That's Paul's words, the inspired writer. Also want to point out that there are times in life that these things are more of a problem than others, simply by virtue of the way God has built us. For example, look at the language that's used by Paul when he writes to Timothy. He says in chapter 2 and verse 22, "Flee also youthful lust, but pursue righteousness, faith, love, peace with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart." So there are some lusts that are more of a factor as a young person, and Timothy was a younger person at this time, and so Paul tells him to flee, run from those, get away from them. You want a very vivid and literal picture of that, you think about Joseph in Egypt when Potiphar's wife cast longing eyes on him and said, "Lie with me," and grabbed him by his garment, and he left his garment in her hand and ran out of the house. Talk about literally fleeing youthful lust. These things are more of a problem as a young person. The older we get, the less there are some things that are less of a desire within us, and so they pose less of a problem. But these are fleshly lust, and there is such a thing as youthful lust. Youth is a time when we feel desires the most strongly, and we probably have the least amount of control, self-control. So that is a time to be aware of. Okay, there are identified for us over in 1 John chapter 2, I think 3 categories that these lusts would kind of fall into. So in 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15, John says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever." So you notice there in verse 16, you've got the lust of the flesh, which, I would sort of refer you back to these natural, normal, bodily desires, the things that God has put within us, that the devil would give us alternative ways of satisfying. So they have to do with the flesh. Then you have the lust of the eyes, the things that appeal because of the way they look. It may be clothes or jewels or furniture or homes, or it may be the human body. These things appeal because we see them, and there may be a God-given way to satisfy the desire for what we see, but the devil offers alternative ways that transgress the law of God, and they are desirable ways. Otherwise, they wouldn't be called temptation. And then he talks about the pride of life, which really it plays on our vanity, our arrogance, our boasting. So these are things that we need to keep in mind in regard to these lusts. And you see these things practically. A couple places that stick out is, first of all, in the Garden of Eden. In Genesis chapter 3 and verse 6, you see after the devil, the serpent, lied to Eve about the fact that she wouldn't die if she ate the forbidden fruit. After he told the lie and she began to believe the lie, it says, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise. You see how these were the normal, natural bodily appetites and the things that she saw, and the things that appeal even to her ego. The devil used all of those things to get Eve to go ahead and circumvent God's will and do that which was against the law of God. You also see this over in Matthew chapter 4 in the temptations of Jesus. The devil said, "Turn these stones to bread if you are the Son of God." Well, there was a bodily desire to do that because he'd been fasting 40 days and he was hungry. The devil told him, "If you are the Son of God, jump from the pinnacle of the temple." And there would be a desire to do that to show who he was, and perhaps that would appeal to his ego. And then he talks about giving you I'll give you the kingdoms of the world and their glory if you'll fall down and worship me. And of course, you could look and see those. They appealed. There was the lust of the eye that could appeal to, and also the vanity, of owning those things. So the devil used all those things in the temptations of Jesus. Some people say that they weren't temptations. How could they not be? If Jesus was a man, they were tempting him, and it says that in the Bible that he was the tempter and he tempted Jesus. So these are the way these things come about, and we've got to be aware of the origin of these lusts so that we can nip that in the bud. And if we've already started down the road, that we can get off that road, recognizing that we're headed the wrong way. Hope that these things will be of value to you, and that all of us will do a better job in resisting the devil, getting closer to God. Want to talk more about this or any other Bible subject? Leave your comments here on Facebook or on YouTube. Send an email to us. Use Facebook Messenger. Any of these ways, we want to avail ourselves to you. And when you have the opportunity, we'd like for you to come and worship and study with us at the Stone Ridge Church of Christ. We're located at 514 Airport Road in Jonesboro, and we meet at 10, 11, and 6 on Sundays, at 7 p.m. On Wednesdays for Bible study. Be sure and check out our website at stoneridgechurchofchrist.com. Hey, until next time, if the Lord gives us life and gives us another opportunity, I hope that you have a great day, and that as the devil uses the flesh and the eyes and the pride of life to tempt you, that you'll recognize it, tell him to get behind you, and satisfy desires the God-given, God-approved way.
We have heard the Macedonian call today. Send the light, send the light, send the light, send the light, and a golden offering at the cross we lay. Send the light, send the light, send the light, send the light. We will spread the everlasting light with the willing heart and hand, giving God the glory evermore. We will follow His command. Send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine, from shore to shore, Send the light, and let its radiant beams light the world, forevermore.